Hi, welcome to this presentation on innovation in banking. And this is a recap of the presentation I had made in 2012, predicting that the banking business model would change and it would be challenged by some other players. But unfortunately, that didn't happen for so many years. So I am now doing a rehash, but I believe the time is coming nearer to where the banking business model will change. So I had been invited by one major bank to give a presentation on how the banking business model would change in 2011 or 12, something like that. So let's revisit this again. And I'm going to revisit this again after another 10 years. So you think your bank is different, right? So let's see how it's different. So if you go back in time before 2008, would you have imagined that the person on the left would have been the president of the United States, and he had no political legacy like Hillary Clinton or no military service like McCain? And he was the first African American president to change the image from the one on the left hand side to someone who becomes the president. And it made everyone so proud because he brought in values, he brought in respectability to the office of president, and he changed the whole view with which people viewed uh, black society, black Americans. And previously, it was a view that it would be only a white male who would be president. And similarly with women, it has always been a male president in America and not a woman. And at some point in time, that paradigm will also be changed. But once he changed the paradigm, it seemed easy. For the second black person to become president will be quite easy compared to what challenges Barack Obama faced. Or would you imagine this? This photograph was taken on the 10th of October 2010. And I think I gave the presentation to this bank on the 22nd September 2011, or somewhere around those lines. But at that time, all the four were out of power, and Gaddafi was on the run, but he was in hiding. He was not killed that time when I gave the presentation. And the difference in the year is just like October to the next one, next year. So the change happened very fast. And these dictators were in power for N number of years, decades. And suddenly in 1 year, they are out. And this means that change can happen very fast if the conditions are right. So if you have wood, fire, which I explain in the next slide. So who started this? This was started by a street vendor in Tunisia called Muhammad Bouazizi, who was born on 29th March 1984, and he immolated himself on the 4th of January 2011. So he was slapped by a lady police officer, and then he burnt himself. And Muhammad Bouazizi was harassed on the 16th of December 2010. And the presentation I made was on 6th of October 2011, not the earlier date I mentioned. And he was earning $140 per month selling fruits and getting his sister to college. And he started the whole Arab Spring, which continues to till this day into Syria. Now, ever imagine this? China would exceed US as the world's largest economy at some point in time. It surpassed Germany in 2009, and it has now surpassed Japan also. When I gave this presentation in 2011, it had not surpassed Japan. And the photo of Barack Obama going to the Chinese president was striking for me because it gave a message of change relations. So let's look at what changes are taking place which would affect banking. And broadly, the changes can be classified into social and technological changes. And the biggest change is the thinking growing around the world that change is possible. It remains same as in 2011, it remains same today in 2018. So the banking model has not changed fundamentally for the last 100 years. You have the saving bank, commercial bank, investment bank, and the central bank, which regulates the whole economy. And the central bank, of course, its position will not change for many years to come. But the basic model is people and companies give their funds for safekeeping and are short of funds. So you borrow. So the banks facilitate your liquid fund quandary. We generate funds provided your business model succeeds in generating more funds than us. That's the basis for a banking business model. And not noticing this fundamental truth led to the banking crisis in 2008. When you had the housing crisis, when you gave loans to people who couldn't repay it, and you got into this whole crisis in 2008. And of course, some historical references that bank got its name from the Italian word banca or bench or counter used by Italian bankers during Renaissance times. Now, for the last 100 to 350 years, you have this whole thing on retail banking, which does a number of things here. And it basically is more of your personal savings account and so on. And you have the central bank regulating money supply. You have the commercial banking, which is more attuned to the business requirements. And the investment banking, which is more into investment in companies and so on, buying and selling of assets. Now, I had actually mapped GE Financial Services that time in relation to different customers. And I won't go into which customers there, which competitors there are. So I took GE Money Bank and then plotted the commercial bank area which they covered and the retail bank area. And then I did similar for some other companies. And most of the banks which would be affected would be in the retail bank area. That was the hypothesis. So now let's look at what social changes were taking place in 2011. So varying degrees of across the world, but varying degrees, but the trend was towards social justice, openness, human rights. Women got a right to vote in Saudi Arabia. Then you had all these things about women's participation in microfinance. People were aware of the environment, but now when I revisit in 2018, you have Trump, which has decided to pull back from the Paris Agreement and so on. And you have a lot of churn going on in this area. Then you had connectedness of business and social networks happening, Arab Spring, people's movement in Burma, and so on. So these are mainly 2011 kind of stories which are going on. Then the technological changes which were happening was in the telecom space. Falling prices of data connectivity, rising bandwidth of 4G, and now in 2018 we are talking about 5G, but we still don't have a business model to enable revenues for the 5G investments. And you can find a separate presentation on 5G on this slide share document. Connectivity with masses, mobile usage, data access anywhere. And cloud services was a hype, but in 2011, but now I think it's more of a reality with Amazon Web Services and all the big ones becoming more accepted in society. So yeah, we are very close to 2020. So I believe that let's change it to 2030. And but I can see a big difference in the way I grew up and my son grew up. And my son grew up in the internet era when he I would say he belongs to this generation Z, which grew up in the internet world. They were always connected, always data available, and so on. And I mentioned using technology for communicating in ways not used earlier was the London riots on BlackBerry. Again, that is pretty, BlackBerry has also disappeared, more or less. And yeah, so these were the generation Z customers. And I believe that the change will happen on and on for the next generations also. So we had looked that time at the paradigm shift because of the above in commercial banking. And there are a number of paradigm shifts happening in different commercial markets, from the horse carriage industry, which was replaced by cars, to the candle industry, which was replaced by the bulbs. Railroad industry changed, the US trucking industry 1910, shipbuilding in Nordics around 1970s was changed because of global competition. Swiss quartz watches. So it was invented by Swiss, but pioneered in the market by Japanese in 1970s. Again, computers pioneered by Apple, Intel started the personal computer and brought IBM to its knees. And then it again recovered, and then again it went through a cycle. The camera industry of Eastman Kodak is well known. Music industry was changed by iPod and Napster, and so on. So won't banking be affected? I believe it will. And my prediction was a bit off the mark, but I believe now slowly and steadily the banking business model will be affected. So what is the value of add of banks? Frankly, nothing. You safeguard the money, that's it. But with this whole US debt ceiling and rising uh, challenges which you see, how long could you go on just increasing the debt ceiling and printing money? Because there has to be you transfer the risk somewhere else in the system. And if you listen to Nicholas Taslim Taleb's presentations or interviews, you see that the 2008 crisis was where the housing market built up a bubble by non-existing revenue streams, where there was frankly no monetary muscle to pay back the interest rates and so on. And it was a hyped uh, payback kind of model raised there. So it is it's only a matter of time before this thing catches up on the banking model. Secondly, it is a dependent business, which means very susceptible to alternate business models. So it depends on, in the sense, it depends on people depositing money in the banks and so on. And it is a generic model, which means low entry barriers. But the basic thing which works for the banks is the trust factor built over hundreds of years, and the regulations which are in place to enable and to ensure that people don't lose money. So the government steps in to rescue the banks and so on. So what and where is the value add? So what is the value add? Trust? Yeah, it is still questionable with the financial crisis of 2008, and we are in 2018, 10 years down the line, and you still don't know whether there'll be another financial crisis. And I believe there will be. But will the government once again come to the rescue of banks? Uh, Safekeeping money is, of course, something which they add as a value. You feel safe when you keep money in a bank. Then established channels and way of doing business. So my dad put it in bank, his dad put it in banks, money in the bank. So I would also put my money in the bank. So it's an established kind of model. Established government regulations, ease of doing business. Yeah, it is happening, but not necessarily for all banks. And liquidity for business is perhaps what we get from banks. Who do they offer to? B2C customers in retail banking, B2B in retail, in commercial banking, and business customers in investment banking. Well, they take no risk. That is that is not the model of most businesses. So how they offer value is electronic, web, and traditional methods. Now we changed from this analog society to digital network society and digital data society today. So we have moved far beyond this into GDPR regulations have come into being and so on. And that's another change which happened from 2011 to 2018. Now we look at the different models. And of course, this thing which it got its name from the Italian word banca. Now we look at the old players and old markets, which is traditional banks. And here I've taken some Swedish banks, but it could be for all global banks in US, Russia, India, Australia, wherever. And then you have the new players in old market, which is perhaps retail companies, which have been in existence for a long time trying to get into banking because they have a customer connect and customers buy from them like Walmart or uh, ICA, which are retail chains. And then you have the old players and new markets. So Western Union, PAX, Grameen Bank, and all these kind of companies have been in existence for quite some time, operate like old players, but they are in new markets. And then again, you have the new markets and new players, which have a very different way of doing things. But again, they are not really in the core banking systems. They are a bit on the outside, like Google Checkout and all these kind of companies. So I mentioned that when will change happen? So when there is wood, there is dry conditions and a spark for a fire, change will happen. Like it happened in the Arab Spring, it would happen here. So there's tremendous discontent with the banks, or there are conditions which will enable that other competitive uh, operating models will take over the banking business model. And then a spark for a fire. So it has to spread. So the conditions have to be right for that, for spreading. So which are the new competitors and why should the established players be afraid? So I'll just take the case of airline industry. And Ryanair is one of the most profitable airline companies in Europe today also. And you see these Ryanair crew, and they have changed the way people take to the skies from being a traditional kind of flight model into something which is very cost effective and light on your wallet. And of course, they sell sandwiches on board and charge your luggage and land you at cheap airports. And they once had a program to charge you for using the toilet on the plane at €1, which was, I think, ridiculous. And then no seating booking system and so on. But the control of money is with you. So you basically get a cheap deal and you have to plan for the other things there. So they changed the paradigm from flying and expensive to cheaper than a bus ticket. And I've really booked one ticket on Ryanair, which was perhaps cheaper than the bus fare I've paid to go to the airport for catching this Ryanair flight. So someone has to realize where the focus is. And the hype should go from technology and other areas into where the focus is. And you have this excellent story of the emperor is naked, when many participants were unwilling to see the truth, whereas this young boy shouted out, "The emperor is naked." And that more or less reflects uh, banking companies which say, no, 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 we are going to continue for the next whatever years, which may be partially true, but if change happens, they would be forced to look at the truth, which is their model would change. Now, when you look at the competitors who want to change the model, they should examine it like the battlefield general looking at the lay of the land before getting into a fight with his enemy. You had Napoleon, who went to Waterloo and observed the whole lay of the land and which is the best position to get. And all of Napoleon's battles earlier were followed by a deep study of the lay of the land. And that is also true in business models. And companies like competitors of this banking model should really observe what is the lay of the land of these banking companies and how can you really challenge their dominance in this area. And the focus has to be on the customer. It has to be on you as the customer. So your new competitors will be you. Sorry, me or I, as in Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. And it has to be around the identity of people. And I believe it will be identity platforms with mobile operators which will challenge the banking business model. Why? Because four telecom operators can cover 95% of population in any country. You are available anytime with your mobile identity. And there are many other things you could do with the telecom operators. And it becomes a allied model rather than a competing model or a exclusive model like the banks. It becomes like one in which the customers and mobile operators go together. So it could be different kind of companies coming in here. Yeah, so that's it for this presentation. And I had also another thought here that things are obvious when you look at them in hindsight. And there have been many cases in which when an idea first came on the market, it was not accepted or it took time to get accepted. And one of them was something like a credit card. So when in the 1970s credit cards were introduced, people were not willing to accept it, and the stabilizing of this credit card required a long time. And if you were in the 1970s and someone told you that let's travel in Europe, do you require a credit card? You would say, do I require it? I'll take this cash and exchange it n number of times in Europe when I travel there. But in hindsight, today you can't think of going with a bunch of British pounds into different European countries, giving cash and transacting cash. And then when you came to year 2000, you had to go through n number of websites. And at that time, the understanding of a search engine was never understood. If you go back to 1999 and so on. So you had website links. There were quite few websites. And then you basically put that website link and you went to the website. So you had to memorize that website, or perhaps you used that search kind of thing. But search was the lowest denominator in Yahoo and other things. Whereas Google came up with the right model of putting search as the main key and giving right search results. And now if you ask a question, do you require a Google? The answer is no. But in 2001, perhaps it was not so clear. And then, of course, you come to n number of devices which you own. And this again is a model which I pushed back by some years. But I believe these models will come. And what I'm trying to say is that when you look in hindsight, it becomes pretty obvious. Yeah, this was bound to happen. But let me know. And this is Banking Revisited. I'll once again revisit this in another 10 years' time. So have a great day and write to me on info@geon.com. Thanks.